Good morning. It's May 25th, and this is To My Liberal Friends. Don't cut him, don't cut me, cut that man behind the tree. I've used this refrain before, and it was famous for being said by former Senator Russell Long, a Democrat from Louisiana. And that's where we are in the deficit and debt reduction debate. Much to the chagrin of the White House, the Republicans were able to put together a plan and pass it. What they're calling for is cuts in spending in the future. The White House has countered with a spending freeze. Now, that may sound okay to you, but the bottom line is we're still adding to the deficit with large amounts, and our debt is growing. If we're ever going to do anything about the debt that we owe, that we're saddling our children and grandchildren with, then we have to start taking a knife to the budget and start cutting. Reining in the government spending has become the central focus of negotiations over raising the debt ceiling, with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy under pressure from conservatives to secure deep cuts, while the White House is standing pat, offering only a spending freeze. GOP negotiators have said that any deal with Democrats must result in lower discretionary spending next year than this year, calling it a critical step in starting to address the country's growing debt, which now stands at over $31.4 trillion. Democrats say the GOP demand to cut spending is unreasonable, particularly after the White House's signal it could agree to freeze discretionary spending next year and increase spending only by 1% in fiscal year 2025. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre accused Republicans of holding the country's economy hostage, calling the fight, quote, a manufactured crisis, and saying Republicans were unwilling to compromise. Republicans and Democrats are digging into the weeds of the federal budget, looking for creative and narrowly targeted ways to cut spending to close the differences. Among other things, Representative Garrett Graves, Republican from Louisiana, one of the chief negotiators for McCarthy, told reporters that negotiators were looking at whether funds already allocated to some programs could either be rescinded or diverted to other priority programs, in effect freeing up money to allocate toward cuts. And according to reports, the other major issue about work requirement and clawing back some unspent COVID money seemed to be close to an agreement. So it comes down to the age-old issue. Republicans want smaller government, and that means spending less, and Democrats like bigger government, and that means they'll be able to continue to fund their pet programs, many of which are designed to gather votes from people receiving the benefits of that spending. In other words, buying votes. Democrats have also suggested raising taxes. Read that increasing the top rate and raising the corporate tax rate. But they've been ruled out by Republicans, and they have countered with raising revenue by eliminating a series of expanded clean energy taxes that Democrats rammed through last year. That would send the liberals in the Democratic caucus into orbit. To summarize the negotiations, it appears that McCarthy may have the upper hand. As I've said, the things that he's asking for in any deal seem reasonable to most people. Voters don't have a problem with requiring able-bodied people to work some number of hours to receive the government largesse. Democrats cringe at that suggestion. Another key issue is that the White House would like to raise taxes. McCarthy countered correctly by stating the revenue is not the problem, since we're now taking in more revenue than any time in history. That would suggest that the deficit is more linked to a spending problem. Basically, Democrats want to return to their old ways of tax and spend. Now they're saying that the debt limit and spending negotiations should be separate, so the Democrats can technically say they kept their pledge not to negotiate on the debt ceiling. That's going to be a non-starter for Republicans because they have seen the bait-and-switch tactics of this White House all too many times. In the end, I still believe that a deal will be reached, and that deal will include some spending cuts, and it will not include any tax increases. I believe it will include some work requirements changes for those people receiving federal benefits, and there will still be the exceptions that exist in there now. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy the podcast or have a comment, make it and recommend it to your friends.